Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I will be your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is Tuesday, July 9th. Russell Sage, Naked and Afraid veteran survivalist superstar, is our guest today. I'm just delighted to have him here. We will be bringing him on momentarily. Jeff Johnson is in the studio with me, producing and co-hosting. Always lovely to have him around. Couldn't do the show without him, by the way. I want to thank everybody for listening today. A lot of people are very excited about today's show, so we're not going to make you wait very long to bring them on. But I do want to remind you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a fan page, CRN. Jeff, I think we're going to get some discussions posted up there. If you have some questions for Russell, go ahead and post those there. And you can also contribute to the discussion on our YouTube live feed. If you're watching live, we have a chat going on that's open, and I want to appreciate those that are also following up and joining in there. We can also, if you can't listen live, SoundCloud, you can download all of our shows. We'd ask you to please share them if you like them, tell your friends, and follow us. Also subscribe to the YouTube channel. You will get notifications when we upload new content. One thing I really haven't been promoting, I've been derelict in this, is our Radio Coast stream. Jeff Johnson has gone to tremendous efforts to make sure that there is content rolling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can hear past episodes, and then our episode today will replay, I believe, at 8 o'clock Eastern time, of the Wasatch Report, Waking Up Cerberus. We have also The Spy Who Loves Liberty, Liberty Minutes, two of the shows with Greg Junkbond Carpenter. Case in point, Fundamentals of Federalism. By the way, we just uploaded another one. That was the Supreme Court Gets It Wrong even when they get it right, and that was my take on the Bladensburg Cross, the World War I Memorial Cross, and the Supreme Court's ruling on that. Also, Mike Meharry has some podcasts, as does Dave Benner. So you hear something of value all the time if you put up our Radio Co. and just let it stream. It is family friendly. You can also play it at work and not get in trouble. Speaking of Dave Benner, right now we are collaborating on a piece regarding the Mitchell versus Wisconsin opinion that the Supreme Court just handed down. That has to do with the Fourth Amendment and warrantless blood draws. Dave's focusing on the historic aspect of it, and I will be focusing on why incorporation is so bad, incorporation of the Bill of Rights against the states. So that will be coming out soon. Friday, Tom Mullen joins us at 9 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to discuss his article, How the Supreme Court Has Destroyed Consent of the Governed. And final announcement, also, Justin Spears was on yesterday. If you missed that show, go to SoundCloud or YouTube, download that one. We discussed earthquake preparedness, the education system, as well as the accusations of racism and sexism and the Declaration of Independence. That was a really good show. Finally, if you are in the area or want to go to Cheyenne for Frontier Days, check out our good friends over at the Fur Side. That being said, Russell Sage, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you here. I'm a big fan of Naked and Afraid. And if anybody here is not a fan of the show, the stuff we're going to talk about today, you don't need to be a fan of the show. It has a lot of this show, like I talk about the post-apocalyptic novels, has a lot of not only entertainment, but opportunities to learn from the situations that are presented. We know it is a TV, quote, reality show, and there's a lot of drama and editing that goes into it. But again, there is stuff to learn, and you can be entertained at the same time. Russell, how many times have you been on the show?
Oh, let's see. I've been on the show 3 times, 3 actual filming times. I did Naked and Afraid XL8, or Naked and Afraid 8, season 1. Which had its own Bears All. And what a Bears All is it takes a group of episodes and gives you behind the scenes. But because my first episode was a special, it was a 2-hour special, we got our own Bears All. So I had season 1, episode 8, season 1, episode 9, And then I was a part of Naked and Afraid XL3 and the now airing XL5. And what an XL is it's just like the 21-day challenge, except it's for 40 days.
Bears all. I see what they did there. I also kind of was smirking when he said behind the scenes, because as we know, Naked and Afraid, they send people out there with no clothes and they each get to pick one survival item. But before we get into the nitty gritty of the show, let's hear a little bit about you, Russell. What are you willing to share with us about yourself, your personal bio?
Okay. Well, let's see. I was born in California. My dad was in the Air Force. Spent whole bunch of my younger years living in Yosemite, pretty much. That was my dad's favorite place to be, and him and I would go there by ourselves, and that's where I kind of got my first taste of bushcraft and wilderness survival, because my dad was teaching me something that was a skill set later on in life, but back then it was just a father and a son hanging out in the woods. So I used that knowledge moving on in my life, and I'm almost 40 now. Back when I was younger, we didn't have YouTube or, Google and things like that. So you really didn't have the opportunity to get the same kind of survival knowledge and bushcraft knowledge that you get now so readily available. I remember I learned, funny story, I learned a lot about survival from the book Hatchet. I mean, it wasn't a survival-based book, but the story was a story of a young kid who went through survival situations, and he had to learn by doing in order to make it out of there. And those little things that I picked up from that book helped me continue my my survival knowledge, basically.
It just goes to show that once you have this awareness and what people refer to as the survival mindset, I think you see the world differently, and you really do recognize what should I say, ways of behaving more appropriately with regards to your surroundings. For instance, yesterday, Jeff sent me a video of Washington, D.C. apparently got months worth of precipitation in just a matter of hours. And what do we see? A lot of people that have this cognitive dissonance where they really don't recognize the dangers of reality, the dangers around them. For instance, driving through moving bodies of water because, hey, they're on their way home. But again, just like preparedness used to be the way of life, we're putting up food in pantries and processing, home canning. That was a way of life. Now it seems like it's a hobby for kind of a fringe of us out here in society that like to harvest and preserve our own growth from our gardens, or go out and hunt and put food up for storage. That brings me into what I want to get into. What is the difference? Because when you and I spoke on the phone, you surprised me. You said you're a doomsday prepper. I had you fit as, pegged as a survivalist, but we have, and Jeff, you were at PrepperCon, and I interviewed a panel that we had Michael Hawk, who was military style survivalist. We had Dave Holliday, pure primitive survivalist through and through, and Matt Graham. And then we had Cache Valley Prepper, who is a prepper. So what is, in your opinion, how are they different and how are they alike? We have the primitive, military, and preparedness mindset, folks.
Okay, so, and this is just my take, all right? Take it for what it is. But I believe that understanding primitive technology is a solid base. That's your base level. Starting fires with using friction fire, bow drill, hand drill, fire plow. That's, if you have nothing, you can still go into the wood with that knowledge and be able to still acquire a fire. Same with setting traps, hunting, all the primitive skills. That is a solid base. But if you think about nowadays, you don't really need to know how to weave wool, because there's so many clothes that have already been made. So knowing how to weave and knowing how to sew, yeah, that's a solid skill set, but it kind of gets pushed to the side because we have so many We have so much stuff just readily available.
Let me interject really quickly here. Like when you mentioned clothing, because that's something I consider as well. And I tell people, look, if you're preparing, there's only so much one person can do. And weaving and sewing and creating these clothes, instead of, and I'm not saying don't donate to charity, but keep some clothes for your kids to grow into. Keep some clothes ahead of time. So if something happens, you're going to get to a point in time where maybe you can't wash clothes and they're just going to get so nasty, you got to get rid of them. Consider clothing an item to store and stock up on as well. Great point, Russell. It's something we really don't emphasize enough.
And like I lived in Connecticut. All right, I lived in what's called the ice box of Connecticut, the coldest part of Connecticut. I taught extreme winter survival out there. So I have a lot of extreme winter gear. Now I live in Houston, Texas. All right, our winter is like 45 degrees, if that, and that's on a cold day. So you would think that I would just pack it all up and get rid of it because I don't need it anymore. But that prepper inside of me says, with Mexico getting that flash hailstorm out of nowhere, and they had 5 feet of hail, the way the weather's changing up, I can't be sure that Texas won't get hit with a severe cold front, and I'm going to need that clothing. So I do keep it.
Well, you never know. Again, I like to tell people, if you're really not sure about what you should prepare for, choose your calamity and start small. What surrounds you most? Yesterday, we talked about earthquake preparedness, and you're from California, as am I. And when I was growing up in California, I heard this talk that California was going to one day be in the ocean. Well,
Yep.
to a kid, that means, well, what day? When is this going to happen? When are we all going to die? And I never really did anything about it. I realized that this wasn't going to likely happen in my lifetime, although LA seems to be putting through a good effort to follow through with the Cal Exit campaign. But since I became a mom, I really started taking earthquake preparedness seriously. And I started looking around my home. Okay, where are the high tension? Where are the electrical wires located? If they go down, where can we go on our property? What do we have to fall back on if that happens? So yeah, I mean, it could be the weather, it could be a job, it could be preparing for an illness in the family, man-made, catastrophic, anything, hurricanes. So again, want to refer people, if you go to my website, SuzanneCSherman.com, and under suggested reading, not only will you find Russell's book, Where Is Everyone, an Amazon affiliate link, and we're going to be talking about his book later on in the show, but Arthur T. Bradley's book, Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family, absolutely comprehensive book. It is the first one that I owned, and it has information to cover all of these topics. Let's talk a little bit now. When you and I were on the phone, Russell, you were mentioning, okay, we've got these primitive survival skills, but guess what? If you're stuck out in a car, we have so many resources available. And another story, we shared on this, was the Kim family that got stuck in, I think it was the Oregon forest, and they were stuck in the snow for days, and the father ended up perishing because he went to go look for help rather than relying on what they had. Let's have you run with that for a little bit while I sip my coffee and enjoy listening to you.
Well, see, the way I look at survival, and I've had arguments with people before, they're just so set on primitive technology. That is, to them, that's survival. If poop ever hit the fan, their idea is they're going to go in the woods. And, that's all good, but there's so much in your rural areas, in your city areas that you could utilize prior to going in the woods. Going in the woods, to me, that's last-ditch effort. Bugging out to the woods, that means all my other resources have been extinguished and I need to go. Something bad is here. But, survival is just using what you can find. If I'm out with my car and it's stuck on the side of the road and I need to get a fire going, I'm not going to go in the woods and try to make a bow drill. I'm going to grab my jumper cables, grab my battery, and I'm going to spark a fire. There's so many different ways to start fires that you don't have to just straight go to primitive technology every single time. And that's a belief of mine. Is it good to have that knowledge? Yes. I think that's some of the best knowledge to have because, knowledge weighs nothing. I think that was Cody Lindeen that said that. And I stand behind that. Knowledge weighs nothing. If your bug out bag consists of a whole bunch of gear and all that gear you can make in the woods, then your bug out bag is, it's good, but you have that knowledge with you that if you lost your bug out bag, when I teach survival, I used to teach basic hiking survival, and this is how I would present it to them. I would get a backpack and a box of stuff, and I'd ask everybody, because I've done these classes enough to know what the common stuff is, what is it you would bring hiking with you? And somebody raised their hand, my cell phone. Somebody raised their hand, my camera. Somebody raised their hand, a book. So I'm putting a cell phone in this bag, a book in this bag. Somebody says, hey, I'm a smoker. I'd bring a lighter. So I put a lighter in the bag, and I'd fill this bag up with everything. And I say, okay, so y'all are ready to hike now. You have everything in this bag that you would need to make it in the woods if something were to happen. And everybody say, yes, there's water in there, there's food in there, a knife in there, a lighter. I'm good. And I said, okay. I grab that bag and I throw it across the room, and I tell them, now you just fell into a creek. You were crossing a log, you slipped, you fell. There goes your bag. Now what? Well, I wouldn't fall, Russell. That's their first response. I wouldn't fall. Okay, but you did. Now what? You lost your bag. It happens. I mean, it happens easier than you think. So what's your next step? How are you going to dry yourself off? How are you going to do these things? Yes, now that's where primitive technology comes in. But you're right. You did have a backpack and you did have all that stuff. So do you need to know primitive technologies? You don't, because you have all the other stuff. But is it good to know? Yes. So I'm not telling you not to learn primitive technologies. Please learn it. I'm just saying you have other means also. That's only one part of the pyramid. It's the base of the pyramid.
Well, and not only that, I think somebody on a loan, I forgot who it was, they had to tap out because they lost their ferro rod.
I remember that one.
That was a $500,000 ferro rod.
And the thing is I see this a lot. Now, when I taught at-risk youth, if you put the knife down, you had to say blade down, and you had to say it loud because the kids only got one blade amongst 12 of them. And that's so, A, it doesn't get lost. B, somebody doesn't step on it and cut themselves. It's all about knife safety. But it makes a conscious effort of you to know where you put it. Where was I when I said knife down? Oh, I was over by that log. Go over by the log. There it is. Him losing that ferro rod just because he sat it down somewhere or it fell off of him. I mean, if he would have known how to make a bow drill or a fire plow or something, now granted, editing, we don't know what he tried. But yeah, he had to leave because he couldn't start a fire without it. And I know a lot of people that can't start fires with a ferro rod. I mean, so just taking that one item out of your skill set, out of your tools, that ruined it for him. And that's where primitive technology would come in.
And, just because you have these tools, if you're going beyond the primitive technology, if you don't practice using them, ferro rods are not as easy to use as they appear. It does say it takes some practice. I like to say, learn the stuff before you need it. When I interviewed Michael Hawk, he said, have what they call Fort Living Room. Practice this stuff, set up a tent, build your shelters in the living room. But talking about shelters, let's get a little bit to Naked and Afraid, because that's where they really exhibit. I guess the rules are everybody gets one survival tool. And then for XL, we see that the producers actually will provide an extra one as well. But let's talk a little bit about the premise of the show and what got you interested in wanting to participate. So we'll talk about some of the episodes and the high and low points. I'll let you run with that for a moment.
All right, so I'm one of the OGs of Naked and Afraid. I'm season 1, episode 8. So when I found out about Naked and Afraid, it didn't have a name. There wasn't a show. Just like anybody who has a hobby in any way, form, or fashion, if you like cars, you're a part of car groups. If you like survival, you're a part of survival groups. Well, I'm a fan of survival, so I'm a part of different survival groups, and somebody had posted a casting call, and I'm going to use my announcer voice. Can you survive anywhere at any time with anything or nothing at all? If so, call us. That's how it was presented. And so I was like, well, yeah, I teach primitive survival. I teach basic survival. I mean, I teach extreme winter survival. I was like, I go out in the woods with nothing and make what I need to be made. So this sounds like it's right up my alley. I'm going to try this. So I called him and talked to him and sent him my YouTube videos, and they were like, hey, we want you to come to LA. So they flew me out to LA. I did some on-screen casting real quick. They said, how quick can you get your passport? And within a week, well, no, about 3 weeks or so, I was on a plane heading to Panama.
Was that with Manu?
That was with Manu, yes.
Love her.
I love her too.
Just if anybody's not familiar with her, it just goes to show that you don't have to be a what should I say, very young person to participate. She is a mature woman, and she was killing it.
Yes, very much so. And and this is something I had to learn, because see, when I started doing the show, the people they were bringing on for the most part were legit survivalists. And I looked at them like my equals. And it would upset me when I would hang out with someone, or I would be on the show with someone who, in my mind, didn't have the same skill set as I had. So they were no longer my equal. And that was frustrating for me, and I would show it a lot in my actions. But then I learned, I guess I matured a little bit in the survival mindset, that not everybody's on the same page, but everybody has something to bring to the table. You don't know what somebody's experiences are, and until a situation arises where they can use whatever skill set they do have, you'll never know. And that was something I had to deal with doing Naked and Afraid, is being out there with people who didn't have the same skill set I had, but had one better. Like I make a pretty good shelter. Manu took my shelter building and added to it, made it better. So, that to me was a worthwhile survival skill to have. Because our first night after we built our shelter, and we just slapped it together the first day because it was about to rain, was waterproof. Like our first night, we were dry. We were laughing, getting eaten by mosquitoes, just in great spirits. Because I tell you what, you have a leaky shelter and it's raining for 12 hours.
Misery.
Even if it's one drop, it breaks down your
morale for sure.
Your morale. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. The littlest things out there just make or break you. And people don't understand, sitting at home, that you don't feel the heat, you don't feel the cold, you don't feel the onslaught of bug bites. And hell, a lot of the stuff that happens out there you don't get to see. You got to remember, like the 21-day challenge, that's 21 days of 24 hours a day footage compacted into 45 minutes. I mean, that's a lot of on-screen time where anything could happen, and they took the best or the worst of whatever situation, and that's all they showed. That's y'all aren't getting the full view out there. You definitely are not.
Well, that's why I like that they have these, I guess, the shows where the cast gets together and discusses, all at once after the series is over in greater detail, and they explain what happens. And again, I like to tell people this stuff, anybody can be caught out in the wilderness and be on their own. They might have their clothes on, or maybe not if something happens. I had some friends that went down, I think it was the Virgin River out by Zion, and they went to go tubing, and they didn't really take into consideration why in such a popular place is nobody else on the river, because the river was flowing too fast. It was two guys, and one was a United States Marine Corps veteran and a 10-year-old boy. The other guy had his son with him. The water was so fast, they got caught up, beat up, barely kept themselves and this little boy alive. All their clothes were gone. So yes, you can end up naked and afraid. You're just going on an inner tube float. Anything can happen. We just talked about a few months ago in Oregon, a train was derailed or got stuck in the snow, and people now are out there with absolutely nothing to prepare them with. But let's talk about I want to get into a little bit with XL. I did a spoiler alert. I'm going to give you another one now. We are going to talk about up to the most recently aired episode. Russell cannot disclose anything that has not aired at this point, and we will not ask him to violate anything on his non-disclosure agreement as well. But one of the things you discussed on this show, and I know that these shows, from what I've seen, people go through, and you mentioned it here, some personal growth. And you had a segment where you were talking about the new versus the old Russell from another show. Why don't you expound upon that, and then we'll get into some of your experiences on XL that you've been going through.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about 3 or 4 minutes ago about I had to relearn myself. I brought a mindset out there that everybody was my equal on my first XL, and it didn't work out well enough. It didn't work for me. It put me in a bad spot. And so coming out to this one, before I left, I had a nice internal dialogue with myself while looking in the mirror, and I was like, Russell, you're not going to be a bad person out here. You're going to be helpful. You're going to love everybody. No matter how upset you get, these are your family members. You don't cuss at your family members. You're not going to cuss at these people. So you just got to be there for them, provide for them, do what you do best, and be nice about it. And so going out, I built a relationship I already had a relationship with Charlie because him and I had done XL3 together. But we didn't get to spend that much time together because he kept leaving 4 hours in because he blew his knee out.
That was beautiful to see the footage of his.
Imagine being there. I'm telling you.
And
they didn't do it any justice because it looked way worse.
And if you haven't seen that episode, Charlie, I think, is one of the older ones out there, maybe the oldest character they've had. And I think 50, 55, something like that. And he walked out. He would not let them carry him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a tough SOB, that's for sure. But so coming out for this challenge, that's basically the dialogue I had with myself. And I'm not going to say I didn't act the same way I acted on my first XL. I acted the same way, but just nicer. I still voiced my opinion. I didn't sit back and just let people walk all over me, but I didn't voice my opinion in a manner that I felt I was belittling or being demeaning to somebody. I was simply saying, I feel like you're going above and beyond, which is awesome, but you're not eating, so you're not replenishing the engine, and I would like you to slow down. I only want you to slow down for you. If you want to keep doing it, so be it. But what I'm telling you is I think you should slow down. I'm looking from the outside in. I need you to slow down. And Charlie was a go-getter, and so Charlie very seldom slowed down. But other than that, that was the only argument I got into, was trying to get him to slow down.
Yeah, he was on a mission. He was getting that firewood. God bless him. I really enjoyed Charlie. Hopefully I can connect with them. I'd love to get him on the show at some point as well and discuss this stuff. Let's get into, you were mentioning how frustrating it is. I'm not going to mention the gal, but she was somebody that a lot of folks were saying she really did not contribute at the end. And you guys had to put up with that and carry the weight of somebody else on there as well. But on this show, let's talk about food selections and maybe some dietary indiscretions, because you had a bit of an issue that got very serious.
It visually, the only thing that was really serious was the panic attack I was having. As far as what I had consumed, a bunch of different stuff. We had these things called black walnuts. We had these fruits. I couldn't tell you the name of them if my life depended on it. Every morning we would collect crabs that were on the beach, and I'm talking about like 15, 20 of them easy. That's on a slow day. We'd find clams. We'd find all kinds of stuff to eat. So my protein intake was pretty high while I was on the beach. And not to gross anybody out or anything, but it is what it is. I had eaten a lot of protein, and it caused me to have, for lack of a better term, a nice solid turd, and no gases could get past it. So where I should have been releasing gas the proper way, it was filling up in my intestines, which caused my stomach to push up into my diaphragm, which caused my diaphragm to push up into my lungs. If I would have laid down and stayed calm, that would have passed on its own. But because I tried to walk to the medic tent, and since I wasn't breathing because it was pressing up on my lungs, my body was using what little oxygen I was consuming, and it wasn't enough. So it was pulling the blood from all my limbs to my brain and to my organs. So that's where all the oxygen was going, causing my limbs to curl up. So, I mean, it was like a snowball effect, you know.
It was scary to watch. I mean, it
was scary to be there.
And folks, if this can happen to an expert, it can happen to anybody. This is why it's so important. Obviously, now you weren't allowed to bring your own food out there, but if you know you're going to be out in the wilderness, even if you're just passing through on a journey from one point to another, have what you need and expect, prepare to be there at least overnight. So it was scary. I think one of the other participants was afraid that you might go into cardiac arrest over this incident.
Nobody really knew what was happening, and nobody's ever really seen me have a panic attack. I feel them coming on, and I'll leave the room and go where nobody can see me because I'm still a little embarrassed over them. I'm almost 40 and I get panic attacks, and I think that plays into why I'm a survivalist. My paranoia kicks up and it causes me to have a panic attack, but in that thought process, my brain works differently. So it goes from panic to focus real easy, real quick. But out there, and I don't care who you are, if you're not breathing, you're going to panic. That's just one of those things. Your body tends to like to breathe. And if you've ever held anybody underwater for a long period of time, just joking around, when they hit that limit, they start to panic real quick and they'll get you off of them.
Well, exasperating this too is knowing how far you are away from help if you really do need it. That has to enter your mind when you're out there as well.
Not only did it enter my mind, it echoed in my mind. All right. Like, that's what I thought. I was in my mind, and not calling the Philippines a third world country, but that's in my mind. My thought process was, I'm in this third world country, laying on a beach, about to die on the other side of the world. Like, what am I doing here? And that also exacerbated the panic attack. But once my breathing was under control, I was fine. So it wasn't necessarily the fruit that had done anything to me. It was totally edible. It wasn't a bad fruit or anything like that. It was a legit fruit. And yes, eating too many of them does cause gas. But my body would have processed it properly if it wasn't for the blockage. And I ended up passing that blockage the next morning, so probably 8 hours later, and had no issues. So it could happen to anybody, but I had no plans in my life really ever going to the Philippines, so, or any of the other locations that I've gone to. So in a real life situation, walking somewhere in the United States, I wouldn't just be eating random fruits that I came across. I had self-identified a lot of things. Out there, they had identified it prior to us getting there, so that's how I knew it was edible, because they had been eating them.
Now, you made it through that scenario, and you and I were talking about snakes, and you came up, this is a spoiler alert, folks, and they started this on last week's show as well, and we'll hear the conclusion of it. So if you haven't watched and you don't want it to be ruined, hear the rest of it on SoundCloud later on. But one of the things that I notice on this show all the time is there are so many snakes. it particularly when they go to these jungle settings or the swamp settings. They are freaking everywhere, and especially down in, I guess, the southern America, Latin America. What do they call them? The fertile snakes?
Oh yeah, the fertilance.
Dang. And I mean, so you can't see these snakes. And when I mentioned this to you walking through the thick brush, you mentioned, no, they're not just in there. Let's share your experience with the snake. I don't know if they ever identified it, but what was interesting last night, they said, look, we can't identify this snake, so we need to treat him medically. I'll let you run with that. But let's talk about snake identification and avoidance.
So being raised in Texas, we have, I'm pretty sure it's like 5 of the 7 worst pit vipers in the United States. I'm pretty sure they're in Texas. Granted, you've got Rocky Mountain rattlesnakes, so other states have rattlesnakes and stuff like that. But Texas has got their share. We've got cottonmouth, and you got the copperhead. We've got the rattlesnakes. So most venomous snakes have a way of being identified in some way, form, or fashion by animals that would be predators. Rattlesnakes shake their rattle. You got to remember, making venom, that's hard for them. It takes them a while to do that, so they don't want to waste that on biting, everything that moves around them. They try to get away, but they also will stand their ground. They don't want you messing with them, and they know how bad they are, and they'll mess you up. So with me down here, knowing what location I'm going in helps me know what type of snake to look for. And if you know certain little things, like you never step directly over a log, you step onto a log and then over a log. And that's because a lot of snakes like hiding up under logs. If you step directly over the log, that snake's just going to hit your foot and you're never going to see it. But if you step onto the log, then step over, now you've created however long your stride is, that distance away from the snake. So, I mean, it's just little things like that. But as far as identifying the snakes, you got to kind of be pretty close to them to really get a good identification, unless it's a larger snake. Out here, we have water moccasins, and they're pretty much a big black and copper-esque, black and brown snake. When they're completely saturated, they look black as black could be, but their head looks like a heart. So if you can see the head from a distance and see that it looks like a heart, you can tell that's a venomous snake. The heart, the reason why it's shaped like a heart is because I guess what would be considered the top of the heart, the 2 bumps, are actually the venom glands. That's where it produces its venom. So snakes that aren't venomous don't have those. Now, in the Philippines, pretty much every viper there, other than the king cobra, they're like green as the plant life. So they're based on camouflage. So seeing them, you may see 10 your whole time out there, and that sounds like a lot, but you didn't see the 100 that are actually there. There's so much more that you don't see. And everybody's so used to, in the United States, looking down for snakes. You always look down. Well, in the Philippines and other places in the world, you've got to look up, because these vipers will be in branches and trees right about eye level and will hit you right in the face while you're looking down, trying not to step on a snake. I mean, they get you at both ends, and it creates a sensory overload when you're walking, because your brain's constantly look up, look down. Now look for food, look for fire building material, look for shelter material, look up, look down. Like, you're constantly looking, and it kind of takes the fun out of it. I used to like hiking in the woods just to hike. Had no worries in the world, shut my cell phone off, just got out there, listened to the birds, listened to the wind. And now, after being in the woods so often and teaching survival and knowing what to look for, now when I go hiking or when I go in the woods in general, all I do is look and see shelter building material, fire starting material, food, I no longer see the forest for the trees.
Let's talk about what happened to you on this episode. You were out, as you just mentioned, looking for food, and they showed that you got bitten by a snake. What happened there? And then I want to move on over to your book. I want to save some time for that, as well as your work with at-risk teens. And we're going to discuss also a scenario that came on with people that are on a different path on this XL. I think it's season 5, and some of the criticism that they're taking on the Naked and Afraid show. So you got bitten by a snake.
Yes. So I didn't get to see last Sunday's episode. So I don't know exactly to the extent of what all they've released. So I know what type of snake it was, but I can't really release that just yet until I know for a fact, because I don't want to get in trouble. But yes, I did get bitten by a snake. And the rangers that were there, the locals that are there to identify snakes in case of an emergency like this. All right, well, let me back up. So I was walking looking for snails, and I commonly have a walking stick, and I always tap the walking stick in front of me. And that keeps anything that's in front of me, it lets them know ahead of time before I step there that I'm coming, and they normally will move out the way. I've done it my whole life. It's always worked. Well, a producer was following me with the camera, and she asked me a question. So I had stopped and turned, and I was leaning on my walking stick to answer her question. And when I was finished answering her question, I had rotated my body to take my step to go back in the opposite direction that I had originally been going. And my foot hit the ground before I had turned with my walking stick. And the one time I didn't put my walking stick in front of me is the one time I got bit.
Wow.
So it felt like, and I don't know for your listeners if any of them ever been bit by a fire ant, but it felt like I got bit by a fire ant twice. And my initial reaction was to bring my foot back and go, ow, I got bit by a fire ant. I mean, that's just how my brain took it. And I'm looking around, and my experience in the Ecuadorian Amazon jungle and the Panamanian jungle and the Philippine jungle is that ants are never by themselves. There are always more ants. So if you got bit by an ant, you need to look around because you don't want to step in a pile of another ants. So I'm looking for more ants, and I don't see any. Uh-oh. So I take my walking stick, and I start moving the leaves around where I just stepped, and this little black snake, probably as long as a pencil, started slithering off. So it's the only thing in the immediate area. It's the only thing that possibly could have bitten me. So I reached down and pinned it with my walking stick, grabbed it from behind its head, and I gave it a look, and I'm like, it don't look venomous, but it is small and it is young. So I tried looking at the eyes. Well, it was so young that it still had a film over its eyes. So you couldn't even see if the pupils were round or if they were, was it oblong?
I just say little slits.
Little slits, cat eyes, yeah. So I couldn't even see that. And I'm like, all right, well, it doesn't have a heart-shaped head. Its eyes aren't visible, so I can't tell that way. Let me squeeze the back of its head and get it to open its mouth. Because the rule of thumb is if it has fangs, it's venomous. Well, I squeezed the back of its head, and it opened its mouth, and sure enough, two nice little shiny hypodermic needles sticking out of its mouth.
You know, I'll tell my son another thing to look at, and I was going to ask you, did your wound have 2 puncture marks, or was it a U shape? My son caught a water snake in our little creek here and said, I got bit by a snake, but no worries, it's a U-shaped bite.
So it had 2 puncture marks.
Not good.
So it was hard to see on the actual footage, but considering it was my foot and I was there, I can tell you firsthand it had 2 puncture marks. So I immediately turned to the producer and I said, hey, I just got bit by a snake. And she's like, is it venomous? And I said, I think so. And that's when she got on the radio and radioed the other camera crews that had the medics near them and stuff. And so the jungle erupted with movement. Trees were shaking. You hear footsteps, people yelling, radios, chirping. And they came to our location. Now I had to cross over this long fallen log to get onto the other side because I had crossed that log to get over there in the first place because I had never been in that part of the jungle. That's why I went there, was because they would have more snails. So getting back, I had to take it nice and calm, and I'm holding this snake and I'm not feeling any adverse effects immediately. So I'm like, okay, I'm staying calm. This is okay. I get there and I hand it to them and they sit me down, and the rangers are looking at it, and there's 5 of them, and they're looking at each other with their eyebrows raised, and then they all start shrugging. Now, I don't speak I forget what their language is called. I don't speak it, but I get body language. And each one of them looked at the snake, looked at all different angles, and all shrugged. They had no clue what kind of snake it was. But they did open it and put a stick in its mouth and show it had fangs. And they showed the producers saying, look, this has got fangs. 90% it's venomous. We need to get them out of here. So they immediately wrapped my leg up with a compress to keep all the venom down in my foot. So if worst case scenario, I would lose everything from my knee down versus losing my whole life. Then they carried me out of the jungle, loaded me up into an ambulance, and drove me to the hospital, which was quite a bit of a hike. And I remember asking them, and they told me it was going to take an hour and 30 minutes to get there. And I was like, great. So you'll have me there, an hour and 20 minutes before I'm dead or something? Like, how's this going to work? That seems like an awfully long ride. But they kept monitoring my vitals and everything, and they got me in the hospital, and they gave me anti-venom to combat it. And, I'm still alive.
One point you raise is how long it takes to actually get treatment. And then we're going to jump into your book here. But I didn't want to cut this conversation short because I know a lot of your fans are going to be fascinated. You don't get an opportunity many times to just go into detail and let people hear the words regarding your experiences on the show. So I'm glad we were able to do that, even if we have to cut something else at the end. But it reminds me, I used to go to this Teton wagon train, it was, and you could ride horses way out in the middle of the Targhee forest. And they explained one time how you had to be careful and how you rode these horses and don't do something called slingshotting. And a boy had gotten injured, and it took 6 hours for a medevac to get there and get him out of there. And everybody mocked me. I have been an equestrian my entire life. I brought hard hats for my boys and myself. And all the cowboys were laughing at how stupid I looked. And I said, you know what? You just said it took 6.5 hours to medevac somebody out of here in a helicopter. What if I fall, hit my head, and my brain starts to swell? Is that help going to get there any faster? Because you're saying then they didn't get there as fast as they could for this boy with a compound fracture who could have bled out. So
exactly.
Think about what you're doing out there, what risks you're taking, and how long it takes to get to help. Did they laugh at me? Yeah. Did I look silly? Yeah, but not as silly as I would have looked in a rehab center, drooling all over myself for the rest of my life. So, this stuff matters to everybody. You might think, oh, I'm not going to be crazy enough to go out in the jungle like that. You can go on something that seems really calm and rational and reasonable and still end up in significant amount of trouble. Let's talk about your book. Where is everyone? I have this. For those that are sharing or commenting, I will pick somebody that I think can benefit from this book. And if you want to send it to Russell with an envelope, he will autograph it for you. It's called Where is Everyone? A Story for Young Adventurers in Wilderness Survival. I love this book because there's so much more to it than you would think. So many lessons. Let's take a few minutes. We've got about, only 12 more minutes. And then we'll talk briefly about a controversial couple on this XL series. And again, we're not criticizing them. It's just an examination of how this can apply to real world scenarios. Go ahead. Let's talk about your book.
So actually, funny story, I wrote this book about 8 years ago. And the thing about being published is you have to be published to be published. That's what everybody told me. Every publisher I called, they said, well, have you been published yet? And I said, no. And they're like, well, go get published and then come back and talk to us and we'll figure out if we can publish you or not, which makes absolutely no sense to me. So I looked up the self-publishing, and it was $3,000. And at the time, I didn't have $3,000 to spend on a life dream of mine. So I kind of put it on the proverbial shelf and went on about my life. And after doing Naked and Afraid XL3, and Naked and Afraid XL5, I'm not going to say I'm, super famous or anything, but I'm going to say that I am known. So something told me that I should probably get my book back up and going, because there's a lot of young survivalists out there that should know the information. And there's a lot of parents out there that like going in the woods with their kids, and they should know the information that's in there. So I got up and started making phone calls and found a publisher, and they were so excited to publish this book. Oddly enough, there's not a huge genre of children's survival books. I think I'm the only one.
That's why I reached out to you when I saw that you had promoted this on Facebook. I said, let's get you on my show and talk about this.
Exactly. And see, it's not like your regular survival guide. It's not a how-to as far as how to start a fire, how to build a shelter, all of those things. It's basically how to teach the parents how to teach the kids. And it's done in a story format, so when you're reading it to your children, you can act it out with the children as you're reading it.
This is a great book for kids to learn how to read. The text is very friendly. It's visually appealing, and it actually invites the kids to want to read more. I love it.
Oh, yes, totally. Now, the inspiration I had behind this book was about 8 years ago. I was reading a story on Facebook. A family, husband and wife, had a son. They went out hiking. Somehow the son got lost, somehow pulled away from them in some way, form, or fashion, and they found the child 6 days later, and he had succumbed to hypothermia. And that broke my heart. I have a 9-year-old son, so he was 1 at the time. And a simple jacket, a raincoat, could have saved that child's life. Something as simple as just some waterproof sheltering, a trash bag, something so small and
everything you mention in this book can fit in a backpack and be lightweight enough for a child that age to survive. And then you mentioned something really interesting in this book, where the parents instructed this boy, if you get lost, dump everything out of your pockets of your bag and see what you've got. And what struck me there was that serves 2 purposes. First of all, they can assess what they have, what's useful. Like, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat this. Oh, it's starting to rain, I'm going to use this garbage bag. But the other thing is, I think it serves as a distraction to
calm them down.
And as we saw with you, what happened when you didn't calm down?
Exactly. And with children, the reason why I put that in there the way I did, and I also put in to make sure they stay put, is because they have this program called the Hug a Tree program that they teach young ones hiking, that if you get lost, you hug a tree. Because what that does is it causes that child to stay put. And children and adults alike, nobody knows they're lost until they're lost. And people will tell themselves they're not lost, and they'll get themselves even more lost. Okay, I don't remember this river on my trail. I must have taken a wrong turn. Let me turn around and go back the other direction. Well, you go back the other direction, and there may be a fork in the road that wasn't a fork when you came through.
And you're not thinking clearly at this point.
Exactly. So, now you got a 50-50 chance. Me personally, I always leave... I call them lanterns. I stack rocks. Lay sticks out. Anything that will let me know. But I also, when I hike, I'll go about 200 yards or so, and I turn around and I look back the direction I came.
I was just at a primitive survival gathering out here in Utah, and I got to spend a lot of time with Dave Holliday. And he told me about an experience where he got lost. And if a guy like Dave Holliday can get lost, ladies and gentlemen, it can happen to you as well. This is, and he did the same thing. You're mentioning You're mentioning looking back, and that is exactly what he told me. Now, as I realized I was lost, every 50 to 100 yards, I looked behind me. So that's why I wanted to interject, because looking behind you is such a great piece of advice. You're so fixated on where you're going, you don't think about where you've been and how it can help you later.
Oh yeah, my brother, and he's a 8th degree black belt in Kuk Sool, owns 3 karate schools, is a SWAT team member, and teaches in the Abilene Police Department Academy. All right, he's a badass. All right, for lack of a better term, he's my big brother, and I idolize him. All right, and it's funny because I took survival, he took law enforcement and martial arts. Those were our hobbies. And he got lost in Colorado. Him and his buddies wanted to go hiking. His buddies drank a little too much the night before, so they were all hungover and didn't want to go hiking. So my brother's like, well, I'm going to go hike this mountain. It's a 4-hour hike up, a 4-hour hike back. I'll be there and back by sundown. I don't need to bring more than a couple of bottles of water. And
I say that all the time. We were just. Anytime you say we were just, you need to.
Exactly. So he took a real light coat and a couple of bottles of water, a couple of snack bar, and his GPS. Well, he ended up making it up the mountain in good time. Problem was when he got up there, a freak hailstorm hit and dumped about 2 inches of hail all over the mountain. Now the trail he walked up is covered. He can't see it. So he tried using his GPS, and his GPS took him to a cliff that he couldn't get down. So now he's trying to negotiate getting down this mountain and try to go the right way. Well, he's crossing a log, slipped and fell off the log, and now he's saturated. And so now he's trying to get down this hill completely soaked. All his gear is soaked, whatever gear he was carrying, his GPS, all that. The temperature is frigid because it had just hailed, so the wind's picking up and it's a bad storm, and he's going hypothermic. Now, this is a guy who, in my eyes, could, fight Godzilla. I mean, he's that much of a badass, and he is getting himself in a bad situation. Luckily, he looked down the hill, saw a guy, yelled. The guy yelled back. My brother made it down to him. He said, I'm trying to find this trail. He's like, oh, it's right over there. He got on the trail, made it back, had to climb into his sleeping bag and tried to warm himself up. And he stayed there a better part of the night. And he had called me and told me this story. And, I was like, man, Bubba, like if I would have known, I would have given you so much advice like prior to going out. Like, these are things not to do, and that's what survival is. You very seldom find yourself in a survival situation. What you find yourself in is a small situation that snowballs into a bigger situation.
I've been watching the show, and unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up in a minute here. I wanted to get into the controversy with Laura and I believe it's Jeff, and scarcity of supplies, and they're getting excoriated by the followers on the Naked and Afraid page for not sharing what they have. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up was it really shows the mentality of society in general, that if you have something and somebody else needs it, they just assume that you are obligated to share what you have. I'm not judging them on one way or another. Maybe we can revisit this. I'd love to have you back, but go to the Naked and Afraid page and you can see what's going on there. People are on their own paths as they discover, how they are going to get through this episode. Jeff and Laura during 60 days. So that was an interesting conversation for people to follow up there. Maybe just 20 seconds, 30 seconds of your take on this.
You got to remember it's still a TV show, and everybody, like I said, we're all equals out there, and that's the mindset I used to have. And with these, with Jeff and Laura, they are looking at it. I feel the same way. Y'all should be able to catch your own food. I shouldn't be able to give you your food. And, I agree with that as far as, everybody should be able to. But, giving a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish, I'm real big on that philosophy. I didn't give anybody any food other than my own little group. But I gave them hooks and I gave them line. I gave them the ability to fish so they could get their own.
And there's a lesson that we can carry over to society. And unfortunately, Russell, we're out of time. I was telling Jeff we need another hour, but he's not buying it. Ladies and gentlemen, legendary Naked and Afraid superstar Russell Sage. You can find him on the Discovery Channel. Follow their Facebook page as well. Go find his book, Where Is Everyone? It's on my website, SuzanneCSherman.com. We're out of time. On behalf of the rest of us here at Cerberus Radio Network, I want to thank you for listening. Have a great day.